Me now, Kiron Skinner, the Campbell Research Fellow for the Hoover Institution. She also served as the co-author of two great books, Reagan in His Own Hand and Reagan, A Life in Letters. Kiron, we welcome you back to America's Forum, and despite the fact that Chuck Hagel performed with valor while he was on duty in Vietnam and served in the United States Senate as a Republican, what do you make of his assessment to those Marines at Camp Pendleton that the world is exploding all over? And do you think it is this administration, by action or inaction, that has led to some global conflicts?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, the comments in a way have a shameful quality to them because the world has been exploding all over for quite some time, not just in 2014. But to have a leader of the U.S. administration talking in those terms without giving the broader context of the fact that in the international system, at this time, there is one superpower, the United States. And when it does not act decisively in defense of peace and security and freedom, there is a void. And ISIS is a void. It's part of the void. It's filling the void. So we are in a very dangerous situation because we have a government that's trying to retreat from the world, and there's no natural great power to step in, not one that we'd want to. Furthermore, we're going to see more terrorism because there's a sense that the U.S. won't act until it's just at the 11th hour, if it does something then. It's a scary time.
Kiron, so often, and perhaps because it is such a scary time, conservatives especially, we find ourselves asking, what would Reagan do? So let's apply that question now, Kiron, to the situation on Mount Sinjar, the Yazidis left there, the extermination of Christians and other sects. What would Ronald Reagan be doing in this situation?
So let me just, before I answer that, speak to the issue of conservatives in foreign policy. I'm also disappointed that there's no clearly defined conservative alternative to what's happening now. And that's problematic as well. And I think that Republicans and conservatives have a lot to do to present a different narrative and a different set of policy alternatives to the American public. We're partly in such a dangerous time because there's just gridlock in the United States about the purpose and nature of American power. But turning to President Ronald Reagan, Reagan did not like the use of force. He felt it was important to be strong so that you wouldn't have to use force. And he thought to be second was to be last. And for Reagan, he would not want to have ever been in this situation in the first place. You know, he came into office in January 1981 and immediately increased defense spending and used rhetoric to signal to the adversary that he meant business. He did mean business. And by the end of his first term, there was a major turn in U.S.-Soviet relations for the better because the Soviet general secretaries understood that they were dealing with a different kind of American president who was going to use power effectively and strategically, not just to use it indiscriminately. But Reagan felt if you were strong enough, you would have peace. And that's why he used the term peace through strength.
Kiron, we're going to add to our discussion now by adding another person. Let's call on Lisa Ruth, the former CIA analyst, now an analyst for LIGNET. She joins us from our Newsmax newsroom. Lisa, this stark situation in Iraq, the Kurds getting arms from us and the French and others seem to be taking the lead here. Is that a preview that the Kurds will perhaps eventually break away and all of Iraq will break up?
You know, I think it's a preview of what is really already happening, certainly. But yes, ironically, in many ways, the United States is contributing to this by arming the Kurds. You have a situation where Baghdad's trying to get its act together very slowly and a big mess as well. But by arming the Kurds, we are creating that situation. And we've had people follow. We've now got the French saying they're going to do it as well. We know Cameron is going to be meeting on Friday to see about having the UK also supply the Kurds. And I do think it's contributing to something that has been in the works for a while. I know General Hayden said back several months ago that Iraq as a country has failed to really exist, and we've broken down already. And I think this will hurry that situation.
So as we may be looking at the dissolution of Iraq, there is that immediate situation there on Mount Sinjar, and now an on-again, off-again approach by the U.S. We heard that there might be a humanitarian mission started by American forces. Now, apparently, that's no longer on the table, at least according to accounts that we're getting from the New York Times and other publications. Lisa, what will be the consequence of that? Will that be yet another mixed signal, on again, off again, lack of resolute behavior on the part of this administration?
I absolutely think so. And actually, I'm going to go back to something that Dr. Skinner wrote concerning the lack of a coherent strategy here. And in Iraq, what we're seeing right now is just that. We don't have a strategy, but I think you have to take that even further. We haven't even identified really our policy goals. And this goes back to foreign policy in the United States for quite a while. What are we trying to accomplish? How are we trying to accomplish it? You know, I heard Hagel say this morning, great news, there's only a few thousand people on the mountain rather than tens of thousands, so we don't have to evacuate them. I think that's disingenuous, and it shouldn't matter how many there are. If we're going to do a humanitarian mission, we need to follow through on that. We are not doing it. And yes, there are mixed messages. That said, I think we have also crossed the threshold of being involved in Iraq. And if you look back historically, this is how we started in Libya. We were going to defend the Libyan people. This is how we started in Somalia. We were going to defend the Somalis with humanitarian efforts. The previous Iraq incident, going into Iraq the previous time was a start. I think we have crossed this threshold. I think we're going to continue to be involved. But to me, it's just we don't really know what we're doing. There is no strategy.
And Kiron, that stands in stark contrast to the Reagan doctrine, which was spelled out. And it's not to say there were not setbacks. We think of the Marines in Beirut, but the overarching strategy to deal with the Soviet Union and that rather simple missive, here's my idea about the Cold War, we win, they lose. That whole approach, Kiron, stands in very stark contrast to I don't even know if you can define an Obama doctrine at this point.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think your guest, I agree with what she has said, and I would take it even further to say it's not, we don't have a strategy, we don't have policy goals, as she said, that the American public understands, that have been clearly articulated, but we haven't even talked about the nature of the threat. It was Secretary Clinton who, former Secretary of State in her Atlantic interview, who talked about jihad. This administration doesn't even talk that language, that we're facing radical Islam. Islamists seek to destroy the West. Once the American public understands this is not apocryphal. It is, in fact, real. You can listen to what they've said, what they've written, from Boko Haram to ISIS, parts of Hamas, Hezbollah. We have not been told that we're facing a global threat of jihad. From there, we could develop a policy. You can't have a strategy when you can't agree that there's a threat in the first place.
To Lisa Ruth, Lisa, it is said that actions speak louder than words, and indeed that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Courtesy of social media, ironically, social media from the ISIS, we're seeing the killing of Christians. Will that have an impact at long last in American society? About 20 seconds to answer that.
I don't know about Americans, but I can tell you it is motivating Germans, it's motivating the French, it's motivating the EU, and I hope it does motivate the United States. Some of these,
fair enough. Thanks
horrific.
So much. We'll have to leave it there. Ladies, we thank you for your insights. Our American Moment deals with Ronald Reagan and his Strategic Defense Initiative. Take a look.
I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace.
On March 23, 1983, President Reagan surprised not only the nation, but members of his own cabinet and military by announcing an Oval Office address that the United States would embark on creating an anti-missile system to stop and destroy nuclear-tipped missiles in space. Reagan called the program the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, while his critics quickly dubbed the program Star Wars. Still, the idea gained popular support and played a key role in undermining the Soviet Union and its arms buildup. By 1987, With his own nation facing economic collapse and unable to match the U.S. program, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev capitulated and signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Within 4 years, the Soviet Empire itself would collapse, ending a